Welcome back to Cultivate Talk. Today's conversation is all about connection, specifically the power of student-teacher rapport in the classroom. I'm joined by Dr. Josh Fitzgerald, who teaches interpersonal communication and public speaking and recently earned his doctorate in communication education. Josh's research focuses on how meaningful relationships between students and instructors shape learning outcomes, classroom climate, and the overall educational experience, both in face-to-face and online environments. In this episode, we unpack what student-teacher rapport actually is, why it matters, and how educators can intentionally cultivate it, even in asynchronous or technology-mediated spaces. We also talk about the evolving challenges instructors are facing, including how AI is reshaping students' understanding of research, credibility, and academic work. If you care about teaching, mentorship, or building strong communication in educational spaces, this episode is for you. Josh Fitzgerald teaches interpersonal communication and public speaking. His focus as an educator is to provide students with opportunities to develop their communication skills in a comfortable, constructive setting. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in communication from Western Illinois University and received his doctorate in communication education from Illinois State University in the summer of 2024. His research and teaching is guided by his desire and goal to be a resource for his students and develop meaningful relationships in the classroom. Outside of the classroom, Josh enjoys attending live music events, reading, running, and most of all, spending time with his dogs, Chewy and Minnie, and his wife, Lauren. How are you doing today, Josh?
Doing well. It's a Monday, but doing well.
Yeah, absolutely. I am super grateful that you are here and joining me for an episode. I absolutely love your research, and I feel like I say that a lot. However, your standpoint of communication, education, and the type of relationships you look at is completely fascinating to me. So, to kind of kick things off, what first drew you to studying communication education and the student-teacher relationship?
Yeah, so if I could speak candidly, it was kind of not on purpose. It was more of like a simple curiosity is how it started. Is
Yeah.
that like when you enter grad school, as I'm sure a lot of people who have gone through the experience know, it's like you constantly have to write papers about topics. And speaking of my dogs, they're being silly around me. So apologies for any
No
noise you might
worries.
hear. But anyway, simple curiosity about rapport. I just like noticed that as a student, I was like doing better in courses where I thought the teacher was like cool. I just got
Yeah.
along with them pretty well. And if I connected with them even just a little bit, um, sorry, even just a little bit, I was enjoying the course like substantially more. So when I got into grad school, I learned that that is actually studied in the field of communication, especially specifically communication education. Um, so that was kind of the connection between people is where it started. So interpersonal communication is where it started. And then that anecdotal experience in grad school sparked a further, more specific interest when I entered my doctoral program. And then I started really looking into the things and the studies and the specifics of the teacher-student relationship and how rapport factors in. And I was just kind of fascinated by it because, as you could probably put together, there are a lot of positives that come from teachers and students, developing that rapport that I mentioned before. So that's where the interest came
Absolutely.
from. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I feel like personally, I can definitely relate to that.
Hmm.
And I think, and I'm sure you've taken a look at this as well, but like when you think about grad school, that relationship between student and advisor can
Oh, yeah.
also be like so important. Like I have heard that luckily was not my experience personally, but I've heard such, negative stories about just not necessarily having a good relationship with an advisor and that completely making or breaking somebody's program.
For sure.
So that is like so important. And was there like a moment in your own teaching or learning experience that made you realize how powerful rapport truly is in the classroom? Like more of that like learning and
Yeah.
theory to application kind of process for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to name drop a few people that
Do
that I
it. Yeah.
connected with and really appreciate, especially in hindsight and in retrospect, and even currently. So yeah, as a student, speaking to to what you just introduced as well about like relationships with advisors, especially during grad school. Fortunately, I was in some kind of like smaller programs, so my thesis and dissertation advisors were also my professors in a few different um, moments of my journey there. So those connections with those professors were, I can't really describe how helpful they've been, especially as I sit here at this moment.
Yeah.
Just feeling like someone who, we perceive as students as like a leader in the fields, obviously highly educated, they're professors, super smart, but feeling like they actually care about your success can definitely, for me, was super duper motivating. And I use the word super duper, but like, um, it's true. So like, I couldn't have finished the master's program without, I'm going to name drop him now, Dr. Josh Averbeck. He took an active interest in my next step. I don't think I would have even seeked out a doctoral program without his kind of guidance and assistance. And he genuinely didn't need to do that, but he did. And I tell that story a lot, especially as I entered a new institution and I have to explain like, how you got here. And I name drop him all the time. Like I wouldn't have gotten here without his interest in my doing well and in the rapport that we ultimately generated. He ultimately was my thesis chair, and I had him for many classes in my grad school experience, and I'm very thankful for him. And then I was fortunate enough to kind of like find another mentor when I entered this specific doctoral program um, that I just finished in summer of 2024. So I have to name drop now Dr. John Hooker again. Also, I couldn't have finished that process, which was really lengthy. Any doctoral process is, but mine was interrupted by a global pandemic, and
Yes.
that led to some issues as well. So thank you, Dr. John Hooker, for the same thing, for being in my corner, for being that person that I could rely on the whole time, even when I felt like giving up. And anyone who's finished a doctoral program probably has plenty of those moments. So without him, I wouldn't have finished, and I'm really thankful for him as well. So as an instructor now, that's kind of what guides me, is that I really want to support students when and where I can. That's my primary goal in whatever way I can. So in a way, I'm trying to pay it forward because I have personally benefited so much from teacher-student rapport as a student, and now I also like it as a professor. So
Yeah.
that's
I absolutely love that because it does. It makes such a world of difference. And I think a true marker for that is the fact that we, as educators and as instructors, do kind of like pull from what we learned from those people and bring it to life continuously in what we teach and in what we write. Because I know there have absolutely been previous professors of mine who weren't even necessarily my advisors. They were just professors I have. But like I use some of their teaching practices or some of their particular methods in my own teaching. And it's like I just have such positive memories and, an overall had such an overall positive experience with them that it has truly made it this far into my career and has left its mark, even though like I haven't seen those particular people in like probably over a decade now.
right. Yeah.
So it's fascinating like how those things stick with you, and I thought it must be, I'm assuming, like the true marker of like that great student teacher rapport.
Yeah, and to be clear, like I'm very thankful for Dr. Josh Averbeck, but I haven't seen him since I left
Yeah.
the master's program. So
Right.
I see him on social media every now and then, and I see
Exactly.
he's doing well. So
That's good.
still super thankful though, regardless. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good segue because for listeners who may not be familiar with the term, how do you define student teacher rapport?
yeah, and thank you for allowing me to prep this answer by providing this question, because I found the the discipline's definition of it. So Frisbee and Buckner in 2017 define it as when teachers and students successfully develop a mutually beneficial, trusting, and pro-social bond. That is when rapport has been established. Um, Another definition, which I also am a fan of, is that rapport is defined as having occurred when two people click with one another. That's more in a general sense. But personally, when people ask me about it, because I've had to define it with, my friends and family a million times because it was my dissertation topic, but
Yeah.
I would define it as when teachers and students just get along with each other. And it's kind of one of those things. It's like, has rapport been established? It's one of those, you know it when you see it, or you know it when you're experiencing it. Obviously, there are levels to it. I think everything exists on a spectrum. So you can have like high rapport with someone, moderate rapport with somebody, or low rapport. But rapport is rapport at the end of the day. And I definitely see the value in it as an instructor and again as a student. So
Yeah,
hopefully,
absolutely. That's great. That's wonderfully articulated. I love the concept of just like clicking with somebody because I
yeah,
think that can be generalized and used in so many different settings in which it's all important, kind of like what you just said, rapport is rapport. So you've published a lot on how rapport can positively impact students and teachers. What outcomes stand out to you as the most significant?
yeah. So it's interesting to be talking about this because I'm also working on publishing more. Because I
Yay, that's so
finished
exciting.
finish a dissertation, that leads to other publications. So the issue with the dissertation though is that it's incredibly long, so you have to whittle it down to meet like 6,000 word count maximums, and it's dissertations are hundreds of pages. But anyway, so the most surprising finding that I've found personally, and again, these are just my experiences, and one study doesn't necessarily dictate a rule for anyone who might be listening and feel some type of way by the facts or the findings that I'm about to share. But the most surprising is probably from a study I did related to rapport in a face-to-face classroom, was that the impact of social support on teacher-student rapport
Hmm.
is pretty pretty huge. So um, I did a study a few years ago where I was like, what maybe te- teacher behaviors, excuse me, predict rapport, and social support was far and away the most important thing. And that was, we surveyed a bunch of students, and that was what they indicated as most important. So social support, in other words, students want to feel like their teachers care about them, which is interesting. I find that very interesting. And what I argued in the article itself was like, what does that look like? Well, that is an interesting question to try to answer. But in my personal life, I view that as like, back then I was a little bit more strict with things like extensions or something like that when students are going through tough times, because it's easy in my experience to feel like kind of siloed, like my class is the thing that students should be
Right.
super focused on, when in reality we're all humans going through a lot of things. Students have several classes, they have social lives and family lives and all of these things. So I really take that to heart and try to be as supportive as I can. And that, for the sake of time, that looks like a bunch of different things. So, but social support and the impact on the teacher student relationship is something that was definitely surprising. On the other hand, in the same study, we found that teacher clarity can have an adverse impact on teacher student rapport. And when my co-author and I were talking about it, we were trying to figure out what that could mean. And how can a teacher be too clear, and how could that affect the relationship with people? Um, what we thought was, and I'd love to hear your take on this too, Emily, is that like maybe if we're over explaining directions or over explaining content, te- students could receive that as like, oh, you think I'm not capable of understanding this, or it's maybe a slight to my intelligence level and how you perceive my intelligence level. So I thought that was interesting as well. So I'd love to hear your take on that. Like, why do you think maybe clarity was perceived as perhaps a negative predictor of teacher student rapport?
That's a really good question. And I can absolutely see it from a sense of students perhaps thinking that we're talking down to them, like, I know how to do this. I feel like one of the things that I'm incredibly mindful of personally is ensuring that I'm clarifying directions or information in a way that fits every student's type. So, like, I know I have every semester, I have a variety of students who learn a different way. Just as human beings, that's just human nature. We all learn different ways. So, yeah, I'm going to have it visually for you on the learning platform, and I'm going to talk about it in class, and then I'm probably going to email you. And so I try to ensure that I'm clarifying information for the sake of the student never feeling lost. Like I don't want them to feel like, oh, that was never covered, that was never touched on. But I do definitely recognize the fact how that could also just be downright annoying in a
Yeah.
student's perspective. Like, oh my goodness, my teacher has told me this information 3 different times in 3 different ways, and like I totally get it, and I understand. Like she's kind of beating a dead horse.
Yeah. Like
So
overkill.
yeah, it's overkill, exactly. So that is something I try to be mindful of. And I do try to gauge like their like what they need. So I love that you brought up social support because that is my research background is social support.
Nice.
So I feel like I put into place different elements of my course that kind of exercise social support or kind of like just show that like I'm there. So I do these like bi-weekly check-ins with them that are completely
Nice.
anonymous. So they don't have to like share information, but like it's just a safe space. They can vent about stuff that's
Yeah.
bothering them. They can talk about what's brought them joy. They can ask me questions that they might be too embarrassed to ask or they don't want to like talk to me one on one about for whatever reason that might be. And my first question of these check-ins is always like, overall, how are you doing? And
How
there's
are
a
you? Right.
scale, and I allow them to like pick on the scale, like how they're doing. And so if some weeks they're just not, they're struggling. Like maybe it's close to midterms, maybe it's close to finals. They're going through a lot, and it allows me to continue being mindful of like what their bandwidth is. So
Hmm.
I do kind of use those check-ins as my tool of like, okay, do I need to clarify something more? Are they annoyed by how much I'm clarifying? Do they get it? They say there's no questions. And so that kind of has become incredibly handy to me.
Yeah. I could definitely agree with that. And that's, you know, I love the idea of having those check-ins because like I do think that gives you an opportunity to connect with your students more as well. So
Absolutely. And they're anonymous. So they feel good
right.
about it too. They're like, oh, I can tell you that my brother really pissed me off over the weekend.
Right.
I get it off my chest, and you don't know personal information about a specific family. So
Right.
it is. I feel like it's helpful. And I always tell them, I'm like, if you want me to address you directly one on one, you're going to have to put your name. But otherwise, this is completely anonymous. This is like for your own, ability and like your own bandwidth of like being able to share information and tell me like, hey, I'm struggling. So I might not be able to like fully participate at the speed and at the level that I usually do. And those types of things.
Right.
It's really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of segues into the last finding that I made note of in preparation for our conversation was the effect of teacher responsiveness in an online class and that potential effect on rapport. So having those types of assignments in an online class or face-to-face class where it's like an anonymous check-in, I could see the value in that across modalities as well, which is really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up modalities because that is my next question. And you had mentioned a few minutes ago that you concluded your doctoral program and had to navigate a global pandemic in the process of it.
Yeah.
First off, congratulations on just
Oh,
recently finishing your
thank you.
your doctoral program. That is incredibly exciting. I'm sure I mean, it has to feel great.
A weight is lifted for sure. Thank you so much. That's very nice.
Absolutely. So, your recent research focuses on report online classes, both asynchronous and synchronous. What inspired you to explore that shift? Was it the pandemic itself?
Yeah, that was a big indicator. It's funny that your camera's not working today because it's kind of reflective of that experience in some
It
ways.
really is, right?
Yeah, because teaching during the pandemic specifically, and being a student for credit where to recognize that as well is it was just hard for everybody. Just education during COVID was hard for everybody, and what really helped push me forward in terms of like my dissertation process was like my anecdotal experience, like we've kind of been talking about, is that during that time I think I remember maybe one student's name, which is really disappointing, but it's
Mhm.
because like even during our synchronous online classes is that no one really had their camera on. I didn't want to be kind of the bad guy, perceived as the bad guy because I'm interested in rapport building. But it's kind of this delicate balance sometimes. But it really disappointed me that I wasn't able to connect with my students in that in the way that I think is beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, which was again, I think disappointing. I'm going to keep using that word. It's worse than disappointing, but like it made me sad, to be completely honest. There was a complete lack of connection between my students and I, which was super unfortunate. And um, that really helped guide the process. Is like, how do I overcome this? Like, is it even possible?
Right.
How do we all do it? Because during that time as well, like from semester to semester, we were like, our classes are not as effective right now during the pandemic. Like, we all had some like learning loss and things like that, um, to say the least. Um, Quite a time that was, but yeah, like that. It was just, I was interested, like, how can we make these courses better if, and potentially when another pandemic forces us to transition to fully online again, or as an instructor, we're required to offer more online classes than we want, especially in the field of communication. I'm thinking public speaking in an asynchronous format and stuff like that. It was just, how can we still connect with our students so that all of us benefit from that connection? Because rapport leads to increased experiences across the board.
Right.
In terms of student performance and student experience and all of these things. So it's like, how is that possible? And that's what really helped guide my interest. Is that experience where I was like, this is a bummer just all around. Like, this pandemic experience in education was very challenging, not as rewarding, and kind of isolating too in a lot of ways. So
Oh, absolutely. I struggled tremendously with teaching that year, and it really allowed for so much reflection because I realized I took for granted the classroom environment and all I'm able to accomplish face to face and in the same environment as my students, because I quickly had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't connecting with them in the manner that I'm used to connecting with my students with.
yeah,
And that was just a complete struggle. Like, I remember I was in the middle of my PhD program at the time, and I was teaching synchronously, and that was the first time
yeah,
I had ever taught synchronously. And I just remember talking to my advisor on like almost a weekly basis. Like, I feel like I'm completely failing them right now, and I am not doing a good job, but I am doing, in terms of material and in terms of learning, like, I feel like I'm maxing out my resources in terms of all I can give them and share with them and talk to them about. And it was like this constant conversation of her just being like, yeah, this is just something we have to adapt to right now. Like, this isn't a you thing. This is just like the nature of the online environment. And I really struggled with that. So that was one of the things that like really interested me about your work, because it
mm,
resonated so much with probably so many of the experiences we all have had in terms of teaching and learning online.
yeah. For and while you were talking, it sounds like we have a similar opinion on like how to approach a classroom in general. And my opinion is like, I should be doing everything I can to ensure a positive experience from students, because I feel like that's my responsibility as the instructor of record. It's like, that's what I'm there for, is to try my hardest, and if I'm leading by example, they hopefully are trying their hardest as well. And in the online, I should specify the COVID setting, that was
Exactly.
that was really hard to showcase, because we were scrambling. I was scrambling the whole time. It's like trying hard, but it's like, I doubt anyone sees it because of that inherent barrier to online learning. But
And also, like, that was a particularly stressful time because like students were more stressed out and they were more preoccupied with just all of this information consistently surrounding them, things they had to deal with personally, things they had to deal with in their education, all the adapting they had to do. So it's not like we all began teaching this way at like kind of where we were pre-pandemic and like the generalized stress levels of students that way. It was like a heightened experience. So it's like I don't even feel, I feel like, like I said, I did everything I could, but they were maybe didn't even have the bandwidth for that
right,
in 2020. So all in all, it was, like you said, very disappointing, a
yeah,
complete bummer, a complete
right.
bummer, and just not a fun time. But I imagine it has taught us a lot. And so I would love to know, like, what can educators do right now, so like post-pandemic, to build stronger rapport in online environments? Like, have you found anything that you find particularly helpful now that we are a few years post?
Yes. So, um, It's a really complicated question, and if I had the answer,
Yeah.
I could probably market that and become extremely wealthy, because that is such a tough question. Um, from from top to bottom, that's such a hard question. What I can do is share a couple findings of my dissertation, which I do think is helpful. But again, I just want to specify these are my opinions. This is such a hard question. Um, Primarily because too is that when investigating rapport in an online setting, of course I had to start with, well, do you even perceive rapport being established with your instructors? And I was surveying students and interviewing students and things, and overwhelmingly I think the answer was no, not really, which is I guess not surprising, but a little, again, disappointing, that they do not perceive teacher student rapport in their online classes. But that said, um, teacher responsiveness, which I mentioned before, was found to be super important to online students. Um, so, knowing that, I would recommend teachers be mindful of that students do value their responsiveness when it comes to their correspondence or their grading, whatever the case may be, is that students are paying attention to that. They're perceiving the level of responsiveness or the lack of responsiveness as well. So some practical advice that I give colleagues and people who ask this question in my personal life is that I try to, in my online classes, I try to grade things as quickly as I possibly can, while also giving quality, personalized, and in-depth feedback to assignments. I use their names and stuff, which seems like obvious, but that's just online immediacy. Um, just to showcase, like, I am a person and I recognize that you're a person. I try to include, like, oh, if you're discussing an experience that you had, oh, I have a similar experience, let me talk about that briefly, and try to connect over those similarities that we have. At the same time too, like, I have notifications on to and again, like, I'm in the minority here and I do not recommend what I'm about to discuss, is that I respond as quickly as I possibly can to emails, um, just to give students the answers they need right when they need it. Um, because again, they seem to value that. So another thing too is, like, on our learning management systems, when we leave feedback, there's usually a comment box. I know there is on Canvas and a few other options. Is that students sometimes comment on your comments? So I've made it a point to comment on those comments. Just keep the conversation going as needed. But in short, just be perceived as an actual human being, regardless of the distance, perceived or real distance, between students and teachers, as much as possible. Treat those students as the humans that they are as well. Um, and I will cut myself off there because I could segue into developing social presence as well, which is an online education, just online communication concept as well. But just be a person. Try to be a person and show that you're a person, and treat others like people too, which is easy to not do um, in a normal format.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good suggestion, and it's a good segue because I would love to know your thoughts on this. Like, do you think we're expecting too much from online platforms or not using them creatively enough?
So that this is like when we get to the point of the conversation where I feel like I'm maybe ruffling feathers, because a lot of people disagree with me. My dissertation topic was a little controversial in various moments too, because I'm kind of putting the responsibility on educators completely, and I do recognize that, but, like, I'm also looking at it as, like, we're just trying to address the things that are within our control. Like, that's what I'd like to maybe frame it as.
Right.
Um, but I do personally think, and this is just based on my experience teaching online classes, and then I was also TAing for a few online education classes, but they were specific to online education technology. So we were trying to explore a bunch of different technological options. So using all of that experience to kind of guide my opinion now, which is a very political answer, I realize I'm giving you, but I'm trying not to step on any toes. But I do think that sometimes online courses in general, like, that barrier is always going to be there. And I think as educators, it's okay to acknowledge that and just roll with it. So a lot of the reason I say that too is because I think people treat online classes as just a perfect one for one substitute to face classes. And I think
Right.
that's maybe not fair to the online modality in general. And again, I recognize that some educators and researchers would disagree with me because online tools are great. Like I was mentioning before, there's tons of things that you can incorporate into your online classes, like Flipgrid videos I've had to do as a student, Pear Decks, Padlets, like maybe those words resonate with some of the people listening. But regardless of that, there's still a barrier between the people involved. And I think that's okay. As long as we're doing our best and everyone's recognizing like why are the reason like what are the reasons students are even taking online classes, when I think we all kind of recognize that maybe it's not as um in some ways not as personal as a face-to-face class. A lot of people do it for time restraints, distance restraints, and things of those nature. And again, I think that's okay as long as teachers are doing their best. And in my opinion, we are. Um, I think I don't at this point in my professional career, I don't know what else could be done in terms of asynchronous classrooms. And so I think in some ways we are maybe expecting too much from these online platforms to be as good or better than
Yeah.
face-to-face classrooms. Because I've seen plenty of, to the second part of your question, I've seen plenty of creative uses. But even when grading those assessments, it's like, I still don't know this person, like from a person to person standpoint. And it's just tough. It's just tough because that barrier is always going to be there. Um, but yeah, I'm rambling now. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. Because you teach online too, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think at this point where we're at with higher education, it almost feels like all we have exhausted every avenue in terms of making it engaging and making it, ensuring people participate and making it creative. I
yeah,
mean, I have heard, just really fascinating tools and fascinating assignments that teachers include in their online courses to kind of try to mimic that almost that intimacy that you would get face to face, kind of like that connection and trying to
yeah,
like actually get to know somebody. But like you said, it can be incredibly difficult because some people take online courses because they work full time and they have to do their work in odd hours, and they're not necessarily able to meet even on camera. Like they're not necessarily able to meet because of time restraints, and maybe they live in different time zones. And we have all of these different reasonings as to why online courses can't mimic that face to face. But it's not a bad thing because we're providing accessibility and we're providing participation for people whose life and lifestyle kind of just look a little different than your typical college student. So I think it's great. But I'm with you. I feel like we kind of have exhausted every avenue. And if we're expecting more at this point, it might just be a little bit unrealistic.
yeah. And it reminds me too. Like I used to do these like super try hard lecture videos that took me forever to edit because
Yeah.
I was like, who do we connect with online? And I was like, well, influencers, like we kind of connect with those people. So I know it's
Yeah.
super cringe to maybe hear this, but I'd recorded myself doing lecture videos. Like I changed the backgrounds and I was like super animated and things like that. And certain students like commented on those things and they're like, thank you for doing that because these videos were more interesting. But at the end of the day, I still don't think it was like doing what I wanted it to do. Like there was no way of us to connect beyond that. And for the record too, I don't think that means we should stop trying, as educators. I'm
Yeah.
not going to stop trying. I
Right.
doubt anyone else is. But I also think like being realistic in what we're talking about is in recognizing potential limitations is also perfectly fine. It doesn't mean that we're like admitting defeat. It's just trying to approach it from a realistic standpoint. I think is also kind of healthy too for
Yeah.
our bandwidth as educators.
Absolutely. And I love what you said kind of about how you personalize your feedback. I think that's so important with online courses. And it kind of just goes to show like that's an area where we can try to get on a closer level with the student in terms of forming that connection. But like my in-person classes, like I get the most laughs, not that that's what it's about, but I do
Yeah.
enjoy making them laugh. But I get like the most laughs and I connect with them the most on like things I don't even plan. Like, I'm on a lecture and I think of a story randomly at the last minute and I just tell them that story. Or like before I start lecture, I like ask them how they're doing. Someone asks me and I just like start sharing these tidbits of information. It's like small talk stuff. You can't necessarily mimic that in an online environment because it's so structured and
Right.
it's so like detail oriented. There's no room for me to go on a tangent and there's no
Yeah.
room for me to tell you that funny story that is actually applicable to what we're talking about. So I think like what you said, it's just about being realistic and realizing that not everything can be mimicked, but we have absolutely done the best we can do with this particular
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned that too. I was like, while you were talking, I was thinking about my undergrad experience. Like, what do I remember from that point in time? Like, I couldn't
Yeah.
tell you much about the theater class I took and what the plot of the play Speed the Plow was, but I do definitely remember all the fun stories that my theater teacher told us in that class, which was,
Yes.
and I really liked that professor. So I think I couldn't agree more with what you're saying is the point I'm trying to make there. So
Right. And it's funny because I know we talked about that rapport early on in this episode and kind of how we take from our previous professors and apply it to our current teaching. And in my undergraduate, I took an interpersonal class with Dr. Doug Kelly, and he taught through stories. So, like, every concept was like tied to a personal story. And we would get so captivated by his own personal stories, we would actually forget we were talking about concepts at all.
yep,
But I remember, like, that's like literally how I remember, like, oh my goodness, he told this hilarious story. And so I actually try to, like, that's why I tell
yeah,
stories, not exactly how he did it, but I do try to incorporate stories to, like, just show them, like, and this is an example of what we're talking about because this happened to me and it is a personal story and it builds like that connection because they're like, oh, she's human. She makes mistakes. She does silly things. She has experience with these topics that we're talking about. And it's so big. It's like things like that. It's so hard to replicate naturally without it kind of seeming like forced and
yeah,
seeming cringe.
right,
Like
right,
it's really hard to replicate that organically.
definitely, yeah. Again, when you were talking, I was thinking of an interpersonal class, that section that I perceived as I was close to all of those students. I changed one of the examples like on the fly because we were talking about how to approach conflicts, and I was like, "Well, I'm actually having a similar problem to this hypothetical that I'm providing you.
Yeah.
Would it be more fun to talk about that, like this real life problem that I'm personally going through?" And I was kind of floored by the level of care and
Yeah.
interest that this generated. Just having me as like they were helping me like on a personal level. I was just kind of surprised that happened. So this is again just another example of why I think sharing and connecting is super important because like you said, like we can apply these experiences from ourselves and others to the concepts themselves, to the concepts and remember them and retain that
Absolutely.
information.
Absolutely. It just makes it more enjoyable for
Yeah,
them,
it's more
I
fun.
think. Usually, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So, what practical steps can educators take to ensure their students experience positive learning outcomes?
Man, that's such a tough question as well.
I
Because
know.
again,
Hitting you
it's
hard
like
today, huh,
right,
Josh?
right, yeah. Because like this is I think I've taught at some capacity at 5 institutions now, and this is always a point of kind of contention between departments that I've been involved with. Grateful for all those experiences, by the way, if anyone at
Yeah.
those institutions are listening. Um, but it is like, how do you give the students what they want while maintaining your expectations and in reaching those learning outcomes. So my opinion is that educators just have to keep trying. Teaching is super hard. There's a lot of obstacles in the way. They get in our way, and it's completely understandable. I really want to emphasize that point is just keep trying. I I realize it's hard, but we got to maintain our integrity regardless of that, because teaching is sometimes a thankless job, right? Too, is that we're giving it our all. You're in front of the classroom in a face-to-face setting. You're committing to the bit, right? You're super animated. You're performing in a sense,
Right.
and you sometimes look up and students are there are those days where students aren't very responsive and they're on their devices and things like that. So you're just like, wow, it's really easy to let this get to me. And I go through those experiences too, which is why I chose to share this response to this question. I recognize it's easy to lose passion and drive, and burnout has always been pretty high for teachers on any level. But I genuinely think, and maybe it's my interest in teacher student rapport, but we shouldn't stop caring about our students as people, teaching them in the best possible way we can, because they care, even if they're not outwardly expressing that they're paying attention, even on some days. And your efforts aren't loudly or openly celebrated. It is still appreciated, and at the end of the day, you've maintained your integrity, um, and maintain those expectations as well, because at the end of the day, it is on the students to do the assignments and do the learning as well too. So again, maybe a realistic expectation in that sense as well. Just maintain integrity and keep trying. That's really all we can do, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And shifting gears a little bit, when you think about AI, because this is
Oh
like a constant
yeah.
conversation I'm having with other educators and professors, and it's obviously kind of reshaping how current college students and students in general are learning and understanding what quality research means and kind of what information in general, like how they're processing that information and what they're believing to be credible or not. So, I guess my question for you is like, how can instructors help students navigate this moment where information is abundant but credibility is uncertain?
Yeah, man, another tough question, because again, if I had the answer for this, I could go on tour and
Yeah,
charge an
you could write
inordinate
many
amount of
books
money.
and
Exactly.
make a lot of money.
Exactly. And it's still, I think it's also important to recognize it's still like relatively early in the world of
Yeah,
AI.
so true.
Yeah, so I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I personally see the value in having it as a resource, for sure. And in my experience, students are definitely using it, even if you ask them nicely not to, or not so nicely not to. Um,
Yes,
but it's
absolutely.
it's and that's again too. I try to be realistic in the way I approach things. Even in class when we're doing activities, students will pull it up and use it as kind of a guide for certain things, and I'm fine with that, mostly because again, if it's being used as a resource rather than the student, I guess I think it can be very helpful. Um, but also, if you use it incorrectly, I mean, as it's been widely discussed and reported, it can damage a lot of things and limit a lot of things. Can
Right.
provide a skills deficit, damage. I've seen it damage just curiosity, about random things. Be like, oh, like, let's talk about this and have a discussion. Be like, no, let's just ask Chat GPT. I'm like,
Right.
okay. And obviously that has some implications towards critical thinking as well. So this is actually kind of a conversation that's been consistent this year at my institution and within my department, is that I think leaning into it is probably our best bet as educators, is teaching how to use it correctly, whether that means using it yourself in front of the students. I haven't taken that leap yet. But if we're doing an in-class activity and students are using it, like using it with them, and trying to show them how to go through the process of utilizing it in an ethical way,
Yeah.
um, which again it's requires a lot more effort from us, the teachers. But I do think it's beneficial, because I what I don't want to happen is those negative impacts to stay, with the students and their critical thinking and drive is negatively affected forever. I don't want that to happen. So just to provide you a specific example, I was doing a research activity um, in my class the other few weeks ago, and a student was maybe unclear on the process or whatever, and he pulled up the Chat GPT app and used it there, and was trying to figure out the answer using that. What I ended up doing is I sat down with that student and we kind of went through the whole process together while using Chat GPT. I was like, what this is providing you is accurate information, but it's not being applied correctly. So how can we go through this process where the information is accurate, you're asking the right questions, you're providing all of the information. It's the AI was just helping him kind of formulate a
Yeah.
cohesive thing, and I think that was beneficial for that specific student. So moving forward, that's probably something I'll try to plan for. Is maybe schedule a day where we address the elephant in the room together, teachers and students, and say, how can we use this effectively? What do you want to know about my expectations towards AI? Because what I don't want you to do is just copy and paste my assignments into a chat bot and have it spit out something that you turn in, because that's unethical. So I'm not sure how to answer that question, I suppose. It's definitely reshaping students' understanding, especially with research. In my research chapter 2, I try to acknowledge, like, a lot of the sources that AI will give you are not real. So you'll need to know how to check them and vet them accordingly. So maybe start with just doing it yourself, because I'm here to help you, and I'm I think easier to talk to than artificial intelligence, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. No,
But
it's so true. And that's really well articulated because it's just something that educators are having to face on a consistent basis and trying to think about that as they develop their courses and develop assignments and expectations in terms of like what, how is the student going to use like Chat GPT for this, and how is that actually detrimental to their overall learning process in this course?
right, and again, if anyone knows the answer, like, please comment or
Yeah, right.
something. Like,
Absolutely. Share the thoughts. Share the thoughts and opinions and viewpoints, the solutions, everything, because I know that many people would love to hear it.
absolutely, and that's the question I ask in a lot of department meetings too. It's like, what do we think our role is as educators? As a communications instructor, like my job is to teach communication. Does teaching AI, is that within our purview? Because I'm not an expert, like,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
so that's such a good question, because I think everyone has opinions, but right now we're at a point where it's like it's difficult to answer that question.
It
Um,
is. Yeah, it is difficult. So, what has been the most surprising or memorable finding in your research journey so far?
yeah, so I did kind of discuss that already with
You did.
the specific findings, but when I saw this question, um, I kind of reframed it in a way that I thought would be helpful, like, as hearing it as a grad student or a doc student or an undergrad student. It's that so it's a more general comment about academic research, um, rather than a specific finding, like I shared before,
Yeah.
if that's okay.
No, that's great.
Yeah. So what's what I find interesting at this point in my life is that academic research is, like, kind of enjoyable because it's such a challenge. It's very challenging to get published. But I also found, and the challenge used to be a detriment, a huge obstacle, where I was like, once I get a full-time position, I'm never researching again. After I defend the dissertation, I am not interested in this because it's too arduous and 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 tricky, and it feels subjective sometimes, and all these things like that. But it's actually fun because you get to learn more about the state of things, especially within the field of communication, and with technology changing communication all the time and education all the time. It's actually more fun than I expected. And it's also nice to know that regardless of what you're doing, there's to probably a place to publish even if you don't expect it. I think I'm a firm believer there's always a place for every piece of output that we have. Even if it's a lesson plan, make it a great idea for teaching, publish it in a journal as a gift. Even if it's like a personal experience, autoethnography, whatever the case may be. I think what really would have helped me when I was younger, going through the process as a student, is realizing that it is hard, but everything you're doing, I think, is important. And there's a place for everything too. It might take extra effort in refining and expanding, and all of that is good, though. It makes you a better writer. So as daunting as it might appear, it is important. Please please don't stop. Again, with that curiosity I mentioned before. And research is good, and it's important, and it's essential for the future of the field. So I wish someone would have told me that more explicitly when I was younger. Just kind of doing assignments because they're assigned, you know, is that
Totally.
it's it's super important. But
Yes, that is something I definitely wish I learned in my master's program because I feel like my absolute appreciation for research hit really hard in my PhD program. And I was like,
for
God,
sure,
if I had spent my master's actually taking this a little bit more seriously or
yeah,
appreciating it for what it was or is, I probably would have been better prepared for my PhD program, or kind of just felt better prepared, I should say, for it. And it's fascinating. It's okay. I think it's a conversation that comes up with a lot of people I talk to who are about to finish their PhD or kind of in that burnout phase of like, I never want to write or do research again. Where it's like, it's so important though, even if it's daunting at times, or even if it's tedious or really annoying, or you feel burnt out, like kind of coming full circle and coming back to it. It's like what you said is just, it's so incredibly important to our field,
right.
and for it to like progress and move forward, it's like absolutely necessary. So I love that that's how you answered that question. I love that's the tidbit that you want to leave people with, because I completely agree. But kind of off of that note, what's one piece of advice you'd give to new instructors who want to build better connections with their students?
Yeah, that's also such a good question. And again, I'll share my experience. I think I have found some success connecting with students beyond like the typical, like, you just come to class and we talk about communication stuff, and you leave and you do the assignments, and that's that. And it sounds, some of what I say might sound a little corny or cringe, as the kids say.
Yeah.
Um, but if there's one piece of advice I'd give to new instructors, it's, again, something I wish I knew right away. So I actually talk about this when I have to write teaching philosophies, is that when I began teaching, I had this like perception of what a professor, college instructor should be. So I tried to adopt this laid back but also authoritative persona. It just completely wasn't me as an individual at all. So my first piece of advice would just be to be your genuine self, because I think that's what students appreciate anyway, is
Yeah.
people who are real with them, and not just adopting the authoritative persona like I did because you think you have to, I guess, is what I did that at first, is that I had to play this role. And you do play a role regardless. Like that's unavoidable. You are the authority in the classroom.
Right.
So might as well have some fun with it and be yourself and not stress yourself out with the stuff that at the end of the day doesn't really matter. Leading me to my next suggestion, which would be to not be afraid to look silly.
So true.
Yeah, I was terrified. And if anyone is listening and they took a class with me from like 2016 to 20, all the way up to COVID, probably, so 2019, 2020, is like I was terrified to look silly or not knowing an answer. If a student asked a question, I would like deer in headlights and I'm like, oh no, I hope I know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
What I wish I knew then is that I know the answers to the questions. It's really not that big of a deal. And if I don't, saying, I don't know, let me get back to you is perfectly acceptable.
Totally.
Like, it's not like students are asking questions for nefarious reasons. And sometimes our anxiety, I deal with anxiety all the time, is that like we build these experiences up and it just stresses us out. So we don't need to be an authority. We don't need to never look silly and not have fun. And we don't need to know every single answer and be this endless source of information. Like, we're human beings too. Like, we don't need to know the answers, which I think I can summarize all of that by saying, like, teaching can be a lot of fun. So
Yes.
have fun and enjoy it. Like, don't be afraid to fail. I think this connects back to the previous question about research too. Like, once you're told no, or you recognize something that isn't working, like, there's value in that as well. It's a learning experience. So if you think a lesson plan might work, or like there's a different way to teach a certain lesson, go for it. Try it out. And if it doesn't work, like, you have a fun story. Like a story I'll share with you now. I tried to incorporate a Key and Peele sketch as an example for group communication in class once, and it went over like a lead balloon because it was like referencing the sequel to Gremlins. So Gremlins 2. I don't know if anyone even remembers what I'm talking about. But I was like laughing in the classroom as we watched this video clip, and all the students are like, "What are they even talking about? What does Gremlins do?" And I was like, "Oh no, this is failing." But I never did it again. But I was like, "This was fun though." I got to try something, and although it didn't work right then, it allowed me to continue to tweak, and um, now I think that that lesson is a lot better because of the failure that I um, experienced. So if you were in that section too and you're listening, I apologize for that activity. But again, it was fun though. So have fun, enjoy it. Teaching can be so much fun. Academia can be so much fun. It's often discussed like this super serious, um, high stakes thing. And in a lot of ways it is, but it doesn't mean that we have to eliminate all the enjoyment out of it. And that's maybe something I wish I knew when I was younger. It's like, oh, I have to be stereotypical Professor Josh. And I'm like, I don't act that way now. I'm pretty
Right.
silly in my classrooms, and I enjoy it a lot more as a result. So
I mean, I relate to everything you just said so much. Like, I have always loved teaching, but I feel like I fell in love with teaching all over again when I just like allowed myself to relax and make mistakes and own those mistakes and look silly and try things that may not go over well, but if they do, it's like super successful and awesome. Like, you can experiment with it. Like, I think, I don't know if that's talked about in the same context as often as it should be, but like I love viewing classes, whether it's like when I'm developing the class in the beginning or even on week by week basis of lectures, as like a blank canvas. Like, yeah, I've done it this way before, but what if I did it this way now? Like, what would that look like? Let's try it out. And it's like, so it's like, that's what keeps it fascinating and keeps it so captivating and engaging is like not just for the student, but for me too, because like I'm thinking about things differently, concepts, terms, topics that I have talked about continuously for years. I'm thinking about it differently now and trying to be more creative with it, and I learn something new or I find out that this is the better way, and it's just like, yeah, allowing yourself to be flexible and make mistakes is like part of the fun. The students will likely not remember it.
that
Like
too.
it is like like I try to think about like I know my professors made mistakes. I couldn't tell you what classes. I couldn't tell you the details of it. Like we moved on, we graduated, like everything was okay in the end.
Yeah, yeah. And too, like, I've had a few moments where we're doing an activity and I go, well, this has been a complete failure, and just like acknowledging that with students in front of you, because they know what's happening too, and if something's just
Yeah,
not working in that moment, and then you get a big laugh and like, at least you're trying. Josh,
right.
we appreciate the effort. That was another finding too I didn't touch on, is that students recognize the effort and they appreciate the effort. It might not lead to rapport in those connections, but the effort is recognized even if it's not celebrated. So I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. Right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. I absolutely love everything you say. Such fascinating and important work, especially for those in this field. But I think even people in different fields can kind of take from this, like the importance of building rapport with those that you communicate and work with. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you spending a bit of time talking to us and sharing your fascinating research.
Anytime. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
And that brings us to the end of today's conversation with Dr. Josh Fitzgerald. I really appreciate Dr. Fitzgerald's reminder that teaching isn't just about delivering content, it's about building relationships. Rapport isn't accidental, it's intentional, and it has the power to transform not only student outcomes, but the entire classroom experience. Whether you're an educator navigating online learning, thinking about how AI is reshaping research practices, or simply someone who values meaningful connection, I hope this episode gave you something to reflect on. As always, thank you so much for listening to Cultivate Talk. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with an educator or colleague who might find it helpful. Until then, keep cultivating conversations that matter.